guys, welcome to another knitting tutorial with me, Laura, and sorry it has been such a long time since I have done a knitting tutorial. I tend to do more crochet tutorials. If you don't follow me on Happy Bow Crochet, go check out my main channel. This is just a knitting channel for absolute beginners, so a lot of the projects I do will be using very basic stitches and going fairly slowly, but in this video I'm going to be showing you how to make your own wrist warmer. So these are nice comfy wrist warmers for the colder time of year, and it's using a couple of different stitches. We've got a rib stitch here, and we've got an Irish moss seed stitch here, which creates a really sweet little effect. And both of these techniques are made using just the knit stitch and the purl stitch. So if you've got those down, then you should be able to do this project. If you're coming to this channel and you're a complete beginner in knitting, then do check out my absolute beginner tutorials on the knit and purl stitch and casting on, and then come back to this channel, and then hopefully you'll be a little bit more ready to get started. So the first thing to do is cast on some stitches, and you need to work out the size that you need. So for this is quite an average size. It does stretch quite a long way, as you can see here. So if you do have bigger wrists than mine, then this should still be okay, but we're going to be working to units of 2. So you might want to measure around your wrist before you get started, but if you're happy to go with the same size as me, then cast on 50 stitches. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do a little slip knot, and also tell you what size knitting needles we're using. So we're using, I'm using a 3.5mm knitting needles, 3.5mm. You could probably get away with using a 3.75 or a 3.25, but 3.5 works quite well. So I've got a couple of those, and we're going to. So used to doing crochet tutorials, I need to get my head around doing a knitting tutorial. But we're going to start off doing a slip knot. So hopefully you know how to do a slip knot, and that's going to be our very first stitch that we do. Okay. So then what we want to do is we want to cast on 50 stitches. So if you've never casted on before, do check out my casting on tutorial and get started. It's a little bit hard using these knitting needles on camera because they're quite long. I tend to use my circular needles because they're shorter, but the circular needles in this size are not very good. So I'm going for these longer ones. But what we want to do is, if I can even hold on to this, without my camera being in the way, is we're going to cast on 50 stitches. So I'm going to wrap the yarn around down through the middle as if doing a normal knit stitch, and then we're going to bring the yarn through, pull it up, and then just drop the stitch onto the hook. Okay, so show you that again. We're going to go into the stitch this way. So I'm going fairly quickly because hopefully you followed my casting on tutorial. So I'm going to go in as if doing a knit stitch, and then we wrap the yarn round, coming down through the middle, give it a little pull, and then as you bring the needle down, you want to catch that yarn there, then just come up, bring up a loop, and then you just want to hook that onto your needle. Okay, so you want 50 of those, so let's do that. Okay, so I've casted on 50 stitches, as you can see here, and if you want to make this a different size, first thing to do is if you measure around your this part of the hand, really more than the wrist, because this is what you want it to fit better. So somewhere sort of being between the widest part of where your glove's going to go and the narrowest part. So not really here and not really here, just somewhere in the middle. You want to measure around there. If I can do this with one hand, and see how big this. So this for me comes to about 20 centimeters. So you want to measure to that length, but of course when you first do your casting on, it looks a lot smaller, but it's an inaccurate measurement when you cast on, because your knitting kind of sort of weirdly grows. It does in mine anyway. So what you want to do is spread out these stitches we've got neat stitches like this, not too loose, spread them out so that the stitches are quite apart, and that is going to be a more accurate result. And you can see when I put that on there, this does, if you separate them all out better, it comes to 20 centimeters. You see that? So that's what you need to do, is sort of separate the stitches out a lot more to get a better accurate result. And you'll see that as your knitting grows, you'll see your 20 centimeters comes a lot more accurate. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do a rib stitch. So this part here, nice little rib stitch, just made up of knit stitches and purl stitches. So super simple. We're going to knit one and purl one all the way to the end. So you can start off with a knit or a purl, doesn't matter which one. So I'm going to start off with a knit stitch, and again, if you're not familiar with the knit or the purl stitch, do check out those individual tutorials first so you get a better idea of what you're doing, and then come back. So to do a knit stitch, we come in this side and we're going to go for that loop to the back. This right hand needle sits at the back, and we wrap the yarn around and give it a little pull down, which helps it get caught. This needle comes down and you can see it catch that bit of yarn there, this one from here, come through, so the needle's now on the top, and then bring your needle up because it helps it pop off. Okay, so that other stitch pops off. Okay, and then we're going to swap to a purl stitch. So whenever we work a purl stitch, we then need to bring our yarn to the front. So bring your yarn in between your knitting needles so it sits at the front. Okay, and this time we're going to put the needle in through the loop, but it's going to sit on the top to begin with, and then we wrap it around the same needle like so, give it a little tug so it gets caught, bring the needle down, and then you're going to catch that yarn there. You're going to come up underneath, and then you're going to pop this other stitch off. Okay, so that's a purl stitch. Never looks like much at first, you need to do a few rows first. Now we're going to do a knit stitch, so we need to swap the yarn through the middle into the back, okay, for knit stitches. And now our needle's going through the loop, so it's underneath, so it's going to the back. Wrap the yarn round, give it a little pull so it catches, bring the needle up so it's on top, then pop off this other stitch. And just repeat that all the way along. Now we bring the yarn forward to do a purl stitch, so purl up front, knit it back, come for the loop from the other side. So instead of going from left to right, we're going from right to left, so it sits on top. Wrap the yarn around, same needle, give that a little bit of tension so it's easier to catch. Bring the needle down so it catches it, and then just pop off the other loop. Okay, so we're going to knit one and purl one all the way to the end. So we go back to knitting, remembering to alternate your yarn from the front to the back before you do your stitch, otherwise you'll end up in a mess. And too many stitches. Okay, so I'm going to do this all the way to the end and just basically repeat that for a few rows. Sorry about the weird tapping, it is not my jewellery, I don't wear jewellery. Someone's commented in another video. It's my knitting needles tapping on the table because they're quite long. So okay, so I shall do that until I get to the end and then just show you what to do on the next row. Basically it's quite simple. It's just coming to the end of this row, and you should, if you've worked 2 units of 2, then you should end up on your last stitch should be the opposite to what you started with. So in this case it'll be a purl stitch because I started with a knit stitch. So last stitch, purl stitch, and there we go. That is our first row of the rib stitch, and you can tell the different stitches because if you look really carefully you'll see these ones with a little horizontal bar, they're your purl stitches, or they will be your purl stitches once you get going, and the ones without a bar going across are your knit stitches, so these ones in between. Okay, that little vertical bar's hidden a bit, it is in there. So there we go, that's your knit stitch, and that will be a purl stitch. So when we do our next row, we should know which one we're supposed to start with, and it'll be the opposite. Okay, so we turn, so your needle now needs to go into your left hand or right hand, depending on if you're right-handed or not. And let's have a look at the first one we need to do. We need to match these up. All our pearl stitches need to be together. So what was the other side would be, see that's a pearl stitch there, it's got a horizontal bar. If we turn that over, you'll see it then becomes a knit stitch on the opposite side. So the opposite of pearl stitches are knit stitches, and the opposite of pearl stitches are opposite of knit stitches are pearl stitches. So it's the opposite. And we need to make sure they all match up. So we keep doing pearls on top of pearls and knit stitches on top of knit stitches. So the first one can often be difficult to see what it is. So always look at the second one along, and we can see that that's a pearl stitch. So we know this is a knit stitch, okay? So we need to start off with a knit stitch again. So if you do work to units of 2, you will always start your rows with a knit stitch because you would have ended on a pearl stitch. Hopefully that makes sense. And then you just match those up. So we start off with a knit stitch again, and then bringing the yarn forward, we're going to swap to a pearl stitch to put it on top of a pearl stitch. Okay, this is very difficult to do because my knitting needles are very long and table's in the way. So then we go back to a knit stitch and then bring the yarn forward, and we do a pearl stitch on top of a pearl stitch. Okay, and we just match them up as we go along, and that is how you do the rib stitch. So what did I do last? So now I'm doing a knit stitch, aren't I? Because I just did a pearl stitch. Did I just do a pearl stitch? Yes, got the horizontal bar. There's no horizontal bar there, so I'm doing a knit stitch. So we just match them up, and we just repeat rows of knit 1, purl 1. Matching up our stitches for as long as you want your cuff to be, or as long as you want your ribbing, how long you want your ribbing to be. So there we go, and we just repeat that all the way to the end. And slowly you'll start to see knit stitches on top of knit stitches and pearl stitches on top of pearl stitches, as in here. So there we go, all our pearl stitches hidden down there on top of each other. All our knit stitches, knit stitches are on top of each other. So repeat that, doing knit 1, purl 1 for as many rows as you want the length of your cuff. In this case, mine measures about 5 centimeters or a couple of inches. Okay, so I shall do that and then I shall come back. But that is how you do a very simple rib stitch. You just alternate between knit 1, purl 1, making sure to match up your stitches on the next row. And if you forget where you are, just look at the last one, horizontal bar. So I did a purl last, so my yarn needs to go to the back to do a knit stitch. Okay, which I totally lost. There we go. So it always helps to have a little bit of tension to catch that yarn. And back to my purl stitches. Again, just getting to the end of the row, I'm finishing on a purl stitch again. Okay. And then when you turn your knitting needle over, so it's in the other hand, we then look for our first stitch, and again we know we're starting with a knit stitch because we ended with a purl stitch. So it's always the opposite, because there are our purl stitches with a little horizontal bar, and we just match them up again. So start off with a knit stitch and then back to a purl stitch, and we just repeat that until it measures about 5 centimeters, or however long you want your ribbing to be. Okay, so I've repeated that rib stitch, and now I've got a nice length of ribbing which measures about 5 centimeters. But you can do it for however short or however long you want. And as you can see, now that you've actually done a little bit of your project, you can see it stretches out to a nice 20 centimeters. So it is the size that I need. So do bear that in mind when you first measure your first stitches, that it can be deceiving. So do a few rows and then check that it's the right measurement and then come back. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the Irish moss seed stitch. It's a little bit different to the normal moss seed stitch. in that we do it on a couple of rows, which will make sense. But what we're going to do first is, sorry about the lighting, but I have been waiting for sunlight for ages and I'm just not getting any. It's miserable weather and I thought I'm not going to get this video done otherwise. So hopefully you can still see okay in my crazy lighting I've got now. But what we're going to do is we are just going to continue the same way, alternating between knit stitches and purl stitches, but we're going to mismatch them, if that makes sense. So okay, so previously what we were doing was we were starting off with a knit stitch here, and then we were doing a purl stitch. You see we've got the horizontal bar and we were going knit, purl, always starting with a knit stitch and matching up all our knit stitches together and all our purl stitches together. But this time what we're going to do is we're going to do the opposite. So we are not going to match up a knit stitch here, we're going to do a purl stitch instead. So we're going to go straight into a purl stitch, sort out our knitting, and we're going to put the hook in the hook. So used to crochet, the needle in on top, and then we wrap the yarn. It's very difficult to do on camera, there's no room. My knitting needles are too long. Wrap the yarn around and do a purl stitch, which you should be used to by now. And then where we had a purl stitch last time, we're now going to do a knit stitch instead. So we're doing the opposite. Okay, and then we go back to doing a purl stitch where there was a knit stitch previously, and we're going to repeat that all the way across, alternating between knit stitches and purl stitches, but in the opposite way. So there was a purl stitch last time, but we're going to do a knit stitch, so it's the opposite. It hasn't gone in properly. Okay, I'm going to do that all the way to the end, doing the opposite. Okay, so where there's a purl stitch you do a knit stitch, and where there's a knit stitch you do a purl stitch. Okay, so I should do that and then I should come back. Okay, so just going up to the last couple of stitches, and this time you should end on a knit stitch rather than a purl stitch. Okay, and you should be able to see it already starts to look different. It's messing up your rib stitch by doing the opposite stitches, so it should look like this. So that's your first row, and then what we want to do is we then go back to following the pattern, but only for one row. So, and this is the difference between the Irish stitch and the normal stitch. So now we want to match up our stitches for just one row. So our last stitch, focuses on the right thing, our last stitch was a knit stitch, which means our first stitch is now a purl stitch, which you can see here very clearly with this messy vertical bar. And our next stitch along, if you can see there, is a little knit stitch just above all our purl stitches down there, little knit stitch. So now we need to match up our stitches. So we're going to start off with a purl because we have a purl here. Okay, so we're going to match it up. So we're starting the row with a purl stitch again. Okay, and then we go back to a knit stitch where we have a knit stitch. We want to match that up. Then we go back to a purl stitch where we have a purl stitch. Okay, so our stitches need to match up for this second row. Hope that makes sense. Back to a knit stitch. It's a tongue twister when you say that so many times. And back to a purl stitch where we have a purl stitch. Okay, and then repeat that all the way to the end, doing knit, purl, matching up your stitches. So don't do the opposite, they want to match. So there's a knit stitch, and we do a knit stitch, and then we have a purl stitch because we've got that bar, so we need to come forward and do a purl stitch to match it up. Okay, so I'm going to repeat that all the way to the end, and then I shall come back and show you what to do next. Okay, just going up to the last couple of stitches. So a purl, and the very last one should be a knit stitch again. Okay. So this is what it should look like now. So it's like your ribbing has shifted one stitch over, because it's like it's starting to do ribbing again. You see the knit stitches match up and the purl stitches match up. Okay, well now we've done two rows where it's joined up nice and neat like that. We're now going to shift it back again, so when we do our next row we need to do the opposite. So instead of matching up our stitches like we just did on the last row with a purl stitch, we now need to go back to doing a knit stitch, just like we did for the ribbing. So we're going to change it back to the opposite stitch. So the first one's a purl stitch. Now we're going to do a knit stitch to begin. And the next one here, you see you've got these knit stitches. We need to switch it back. These knitting needles are too long. Switch it back to a purl stitch. Okay, and then we go back to knit stitch where we have purls. Do the opposite. And then switch it back to a purl stitch where we have knit stitches. Okay, and keep doing that all the way across. So we've got purls, 2 purls, so we're going to do a knit stitch, back to a purl stitch where we have knit stitches, then where we have purls we do a knit stitch. Okay, so knit purl all the way to the end, doing the opposite stitches to your last row. Okay, so just coming up to the end, and we need to do the opposite, so I need to do a knit stitch because there's a purl, and we should end on a purl stitch this time rather than a knit stitch. So if you start your row with a knit stitch, you'll end on a purl, and if you start your row with a purl stitch, you'll end on a knit stitch. So as long as you're working to a stitch count of 2 units of 2. Okay, so now our stitches have switched back to the same direction as your ribbing. You can see here closely we've got goes from 2 little purl stitches with the bars, and then there's a knit stitch above it. Okay, so we did 2 rows, the purls and the knits, and then we swapped a bit back to a purl stitch. So now we do a row to match it up. Okay, so we don't twist it up, we don't do the opposite, we do the same. We need to match our stitches up. So we started with a knit stitch, there's a knit stitch here, and we can tell because the next one is a purl stitch, so we know this is a knit stitch. So now we do our 1 row of matching it up. Okay, so we do start off with a knit stitch, and this is basically all we do for the Irish moss seed stitch. We do 2 rows of the same stitches, and then the next row we do the opposite, and then do another row matching it up. So this time we're matching it up, so we've got a purl, we do a purl, so we do the same this time, so the stitches match up, just normal ribbing. So there's a knit stitch, and we do another knit stitch on top, and then next one is a purl stitch. You can see the bar, so we do a purl stitch. Okay, so we do 1 row of doing the opposite, and then we do 1 row of matching it up, and then we go back to doing 1 row of the opposite and then 1 row matching it up, and we just repeat that for as long as you want your wrist warmers to be. Okay, so there we go, so we do a matching up row, and what you end up with by alternating every 2 rows is something that ends up looking like this. And you can check what row you're on, because you should have see here, you've got 2 little knit stitches, and then it goes back to 2 purl stitches, if my camera focuses, then 2 knit stitches, 2 purl stitches, 2 knit stitches, 2 purl stitches, and that is the pattern. And next to it obviously is the opposite, so where you've got 2 knit stitches, you've got 2 purl stitches. So it ends up being exactly the same as the rib stitch, but it's sort of blocked. It's like sort of every 2 rows is just shifting over 1 stitch, and that creates the Irish moss seed stitch. So it's worked on every 2 rows rather than every row. So I shall continue this, and you want to repeat those 2 rows until it measures about, well for me it measured about 12 to 13 centimeters roughly about 12.5 centimeters. But however long you want your wrist warmer to be, wherever you want it to come up to, and then I'll show you how to finish off and bind off at the very end. Okay, so this row is a matching row, we'll call it, so we match up our stitches. So it's a purl next, so I do a purl, then the next stitch is a knit stitch, so I do a knit stitch, and once I've done my one row of matching, I go back to doing the opposite row. Then I do a row of matching, then back to an opposite row, and so on and so forth. Okay, so it's worked over every 2 rows. So I shall do that, and then I shall come back and show you how to finish off. But that is the basics of the Irish moss seed stitch. I hope it makes sense. Any questions, post them in the comments below. And if you don't know my crochet channel, then do check out my Happy Bay crochet channel for lots of crochet tutorials, which I do a lot more of. And there we go. So yeah, just repeat those 2 rows, alternating every other row, and I shall come back and show you how to finish off your wrist warmers. And I don't recommend knitting with long knitting needles on a table. You see it's starting to come together. Now we've wrought our second row, which is a matching row. You can see the nice 2 knit stitches, and then 2 purl stitches, 2 knit stitches. Above the 2 purl, 2 purl, 2 knit, 2 knit, 2 purl. You can see? Okay. And if you forget where you are, then just check for that horizontal bar and you'll know what to do. And if you're unsure what row you're on, whether you need to if you need to do a matching row or an opposite row, then just check for those 2 little knit stitches there. Make sure you've got 2 purl stitches, and if you've only got, see there, we know this one here, we've got 2 knit stitches, 1, 2, and then we've got just that 1 horizontal bar, so we know that we're on a matching row because we've only got the 1 purl stitch. Okay, it's a bit easier to see with the purl stitches rather than the knit stitches. And there we go. So good luck, and I'll join me again when you've finished your length of your Irish moss seed stitch. Okay, so I just got to the end of that row of my matching row. So I've got 2 rows that look the same. See there, we've got the 2 bars for the purls, 2 knit stitches. Now we need to go back to doing the opposite row. So the very end one here is always quite difficult to tell. We've got, but we look for our purl stitches, we know it's a knit stitch, so we know we need to start with a purl stitch this time, and we do the opposite. So I do a purl stitch to begin, and then our next stitch is a purl stitch, so I'm going to do a knit stitch, and so on and so forth. Okay. Okay, so I've continued the Irish moss seed stitch, as you can see here, and it's much more noticeable after you do a few more rows. Just doing 2 rows in one way and then 2 rows in the next way, going backwards and forwards. So it's like exactly the same as your rib stitch, but you're just changing it over by 1 stitch every other row, every 2 rows. So once you've got the length that you want and it matches your other mitt, because these are both identical, my moss stitch is about 12 centimeters, so all in all comes to about sort of 16, 17 centimeters, but however long you want to do it for. It doesn't matter what row you end on or anything like that, because what we're going to do now is we're just going to finish up and cast off, and I'm just going to cast off with a knit stitch all the way across. So every stitch is a knit stitch, I think I did. So to cast off, I have done a video in more detail of casting off, but I'll just show you quickly in this video. Sorry, the lighting again isn't amazing. Let's see if I can get some better lighting. So we're just going to put our needle in and do a knit stitch to begin, and then we go straight into the next stitch and do a knit stitch there as well. And then what you want to do, once you've got 2 loops on your needle, 2 stitches, we're going to take the first loop and just pulling, keep a little bit of tension on there. We're going to bring that over the other loop and then drop it off. Okay, and that's casting off. Then we knit another stitch. So you don't have to do knit stitches, you can cast off with any stitch. You may even want to carry on doing a knit one, purl one and casting off, that's fine too. So again, when you've knitted another one, you've got 2 stitches on your needle. We take this one this side and we just pull it over the other stitch. Okay, and we keep doing that all the way to the end. So we knit a stitch, and when we've got 2, we take the one on the right hand side and we just pull it, give that a little pull, we just pull that over the top. So it goes over the top of that stitch and then drop it down. Okay, so do that all the way across until you end up with just 1 loop left on your needle, 1 stitch left, and then we shall finish up. Okay, so just coming up to the very last stitch, we're going to do the same knit stitch this one as well. We've got 2 loops, the last 2 loops. We take this one again, bring it over the top of your last stitch, so you end up with 1 loop left. Okay, so what we're going to do now is get some scissors and we're going to cut our yarn, but we're going to leave a little bit of a tail for sewing the glove closed. So I'm going to leave a little bit of a length of yarn. Okay, and what you want to do is, let's get our tail end, get it on camera, helps. So this is our cut yarn, and all I'm going to do is bring up the loop and I'm going to feed the tail end, take the needle out, I'm going to feed the tail end through the loop in there. Okay, pull that through, then I'm just going to pull to tighten. Okay, and then that will secure all your stitches, and it should look a little something like this. Hopefully not too tight, try and keep your stitches loose. So we end up with a flat project, and all that's left to do is to sew up the end. So we're going to fold it in half, and we use our tail end, we're going to sew all the way across using the ladder stitch. Okay, so we're going to get ourselves a yarn needle. Got a nice one here that isn't all sharp at the bottom. Thread that on, and we want to find, let's have a look on the opposite side first, the edge of our work. Now it's going to be a little bit harder than, say, ladder stitching the ribbing closed. But what you want to do is, first thing we're going to do is we're just going to join up with the other side. So going to just put that through the end just to get it over to the other side. Okay, now what we want to do is find the stitches on the edge. My camera will focus. Now if you pull it out slightly, you'll find these little horizontal bars here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go under the top one of those there. Okay. Then on the other side we want to find the same. We pull our stitching out. You can see the horizontal bars, so it's just below this first stitch, and we're going to go under that top one as well. My camera's not going to fall over. We're going to do that all the way down, so find the last one you did, and then we're going to go under the one just below it. Okay. And the same at the other side. There it is, just below. Okay. We're going to do that all the way down. So then the next side, we just find the next horizontal bar down there. Okay, so it should be 2 little bars. I'm going to go into the next one. and then the corresponding one the other side here, and then the one underneath, and then the next one, then the next one's going to be a little bit further down. Okay, there it is. Okay. It just looks as neatly as possible across there. So I'm going to do it all the way down to the ribbing stitch, and then I'll show you it on the ribbing stitch, which is a lot easier to see, hopefully. It's a little bit tricky. Okay, so when you get down to the ribbing, what we want to do is on this side you're going to have two columns of V's going down. There's that one there, and there's this one right on the edge here. Now what we want to do is split those open. We're going to work down the middle, and when you split it open you should see these bars here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to find the first two. They come in sets of two. We're going to find that top one and we're going to sew into there. Then the other side, which just has one set of column of V's and then just these loopy bits on the end, we're going to split those open, and as you can see you've got this very sort of edge here, and then you've got the bars, and then you've got your V. So we're going to catch that top bar there, and we're going to do that all the way down. So then we need to go back this side, and we're going to find the bottom of that two set in between. We're going to go into there. Then this side, going to find the bottom one over here. Fingers in the way. Okay, we're going to do that all the way down. So then we split open these two V's. These are the next two. We're going to find the top one, go under there. And this side, between the outer edge and this column V, these are the next two. We're going to find the top one. Then we find the bottom one, which is there, and then the bottom one this side. Okay. Then the next two, in between the two columns of V's, we find the top one. Then this side, between the outer edge and the one column of V's, these are the next two. We're going to find this top one, and then we work into the bottom one, and the bottom one this side. We're going to do that all the way down to the end, okay? And then when you pull it a little bit, you can scrunch it in, and it looks like there's no join at all. It'd be hard to tell where it was. Okay, so let's do that all the way down to the very end. So these are the next two. And there we go, got to the end, and you can see it's created a nice join, and all your V's are lined up like so. Okay, then what we want to do is just sew in our remaining tail end. So going on to the inside, you've got a couple of tail ends, the very beginning one and the very ending one. And we're just going to sew through some of this stitching on the inside neatly as we can, without pulling it too tightly. Then come back in the opposite direction. Trim down any excess. And do the same for your other tail end as well. There we go. That's the sewing, and then there is your finished wrist warmer, and you can repeat all those steps to make another one exactly the same, and then you can enjoy wearing them. Ta-da! Like so, if I zoom out a little bit, there we go. Some nice warm wrist warmers, I can't even say it. But also, why not experiment with different yarns as well? These are some I made with a chunky yarn. This is a King Cole Big Value chunky yarn, and I made the ribbing a little bit short. There's only a few rounds of this, and I also started off with less stitches. I think I started with 20 stitches for these ones, and these are these wrist warmers, and these ones work up a lot quicker because they're really chunky. And yeah, so hopefully you'll have some fun playing with some different yarns and making your own wrist warmers. But that's all for now. Join me in my next video, whether it be crochet or knitting. I'll see you soon for some more knitting fun, hopefully. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.